Welcome to Inside Equine Minds, a podcast where I, Caitlin Hendry, meet with trainers, riders, and grooms to dive deep inside the minds of the most successful horses in various disciplines. We'll take you behind the scenes from the horse's perspective to learn about how these horses are trained and managed in a way that strengthens their mental game and fuels their success. This podcast is brought to you by EQPI, or Equine Performance Identities, which is a personality profiling tool to help you understand your horse at an individual level. An EQPI profile provides information about your horse's individual needs and motivations so you can manage and work with them in a way that brings out their best. An EQPI profile can also inform breeding and sales by providing information about temperament to ensure the best match possible between either horse and rider or stallion and mare. In today's episode of Inside Equine Minds, I will be meeting with Anna Buffini about her horse, Fiontini. Fio, as she's known, is a 2010 Danish warmblood mare. As a young horse, Fio saw a massive amount of success with Severo Jurado Lopez. Together, they won the World Champion Young Horse title 3 years in a row when Fio was a 5, 6, and as a 7-year-old. In late 2021, Anna took over the reins and bought Fio. They took a couple years off from competing to really focus on building their relationship and understanding each other. But in 2024, they're back at it, and they made quite a splash, including being named on the shortlist for the 2024 Olympic dressage team. I'm sure that they have plenty of success ahead of them, but I'm really looking forward to speaking with Anna about that 2-year gap, really, and what she learned and how to build that relationship with Fio and bring out the best in her. But as always, before we do so, let's all make sure we're on the same page around Fio's EQPI profile. To get Fio's profile, Anna took the online EQPI survey, which is a 10-minute survey. You can find it on my website, and it's essentially a list of behaviors, and you tell me which ones that you observe and how often you observe them. And using those inputs, I'm able to determine where your horse falls on each of the 4 spectrums that EQPI measures. These 4 behavioral spectrums are the independent spectrum, which is the horse's preference to control or comply, the extroversion spectrum, which is the horse's preference to interact or isolate, the stability spectrum, which is the horse's preference for predictability or variety, and lastly, the structure spectrum, which is the horse's preference for clarity or flexibility. In addition to looking at where the horse falls on each of these individual spectrums, I then also see how these spectrums relate to each other. And by doing this, I'm able to get a more complete, nuanced picture of this horse's personality profile. For the independence spectrum for Fio, she is slightly high. High independence horses tend to prefer autonomy. They tend to like to make their own decisions. They're not usually as motivated by pleasing. It's usually more of a what's in it for me mindset. For the extroversion spectrum, Fio is considered low. Low extroversion horses are not as social as one might guess, but they also tend to not be as outwardly expressive. Like if they're experiencing emotions, they tend to kind of recede into themselves to process those emotions alone. For the stability spectrum, Fio is slightly high, just like her independence. High stability horses tend to be a little bit more methodical, a little bit more predictable. They're also usually not as hot as a low extroversion horse. They don't have quite as much energy. For the last spectrum, the structure spectrum, Fio is considered high. High structure horses like clarity. They like to know exactly what's expected of them, and they also get more confidence the more they know how to do something. They can be more anxious horses because they don't like to be wrong, and if they don't know what's expected of them, they show some nervousness. But once they actually know what they're doing, they can be very confident when they know that they know what the right answer is. High structure horses also tend to be the more sensitive horses. Now that we've looked at all of the individual spectrums, let's take a quick moment to take a look at the relationships between the spectrums. The first relationship that we'll look at is between her slightly high independence and her low extroversion. When a horse's extroversion is lower than their independence spectrum, they tend to be more task-oriented. And so they are more driven and more motivated by what's in it for me and kind of getting the job done rather than being inherently motivated to please or to do something in order to be liked, because of that low extroversion doesn't really care if they're liked or not. The relationship between Fio's low extroversion and her slightly high stability means that she is going to take more time to open up to new people. She's not going to be one that's super eager to approach new horses or new people. She's going to prefer to stick with who she knows, and it's going to take a while to build the relationship, especially because she is more task-oriented and therefore just not as motivated by that relationship. Fio's structure spectrum is considered high, and even though her stability spectrum is also slightly high, her structure spectrum is higher than her stability. So even though she is going to be more methodical and stable and kind of the same horse every day because of her high stability, she is going to particularly care about rules and following rules. So her structure kind of takes over the stability spectrum a little bit, in that she wants things to be the same. If an expectation has been set, she is not going to appreciate if that standard is changed or the expectation of her has changed. Her structure spectrum is also higher than her high independence. And when the structure spectrum is higher than the independence spectrum, even when the independence spectrum's on the high side, they are still more risk-averse horses. So if she's in a new environment or being asked to do something that she doesn't know, or something changes on her, we'll probably see a little bit more spookiness or anxiousness. Okay, the last relationship that I want to mention is actually the strongest relationship, meaning that these two spectrums are the farthest apart in her profile. This is the relationship between her low extroversion and her high structure. So we've already talked about how she's not really motivated by pleasing others. She's more task oriented because of her high independence and low extroversion. She takes longer to warm up to new people because of her low extroversion and her high stability. But her high structure adds an element of trust. Like, not only is she not super interested in building new relationships or motivated by those relationships, but she's very skeptical because of her high structure and the relationship between her high structure and her low extroversion. And so building this trust is going to take a long time. You're really going to have to earn it. If you want to see Fio's profile, it's available on the Inside Equine Minds Patreon account. Members of the Patreon have access to all of the guest horse profiles for free. Or you can purchase the EQPI profile on the Patreon account if you don't want to be a member yet. But members also get early access to the podcast content and discount codes for EQPI services. Just throwing that out there. So now that we all have the same understanding of Fio's EQPI personality profile, let's bring in Anna. Hey, Anna, welcome to the Inside Equine Minds podcast. I appreciate you joining me to talk about Fio. Let's start with this question. If you had to choose one thing about Fio's personality, what would you pick as the best thing?
I think that she is so determined. Everything she does, she is extremely determined, and she's so independent that she doesn't need anybody's help. Like, whatever she wants to do, she knows she can do. She's confident about it. And I think that's what makes her such a good partner in the show ring.
She has high structure, and that's almost, I think it is her highest. It's really close to her low extroversion, but it's one of her highest spectrums. And horses who are high structure when they're doing something that they know how to do really well, that's where they get a lot of confidence. And so they can, yeah, sort of come across as more high independence horses, although she is also slightly high on the independence spectrum. So she already has the self confidence. And then, in addition to doing something she knows really well, I can definitely get this sense that she's like, don't worry, I got it. Like, you don't need to give
Yeah.
me aids. Like, I know what's coming next. Yeah.
Completely.
So, what aspect of Fio's personality do you find the most challenging to navigate?
Part of it was how much of an introvert she was, how independent she was, figuring out how to help her find her home, find her confidence, find her peace where she is and not have to feel like she has to be so independent and that she can rely on me and she can trust me, be confident in me that I'm here, the way I treat her is the same in and out of the ring, and that together we're better and that she can really trust me and be happy in her new life.
Mm-hmm. How did that show up in how you were interacting with her?
Yeah, so when I first got her on the ground, she was really tricky. Like she wouldn't really connect with me. She'd never like look me in the eye. She was always kind of staring off. She
Mm.
felt like she's very protective of like letting her guard down. And so she would always be a little bit spooky. She would never like just stand and cuddle. She doesn't love being kissed in the face. She doesn't like being forced to do anything, which like I would never force her, but like when your horse's head is like to the side and you want to like bring their head over to kiss them, like that's not her thing. She's like,
No, thanks. Yeah.
exactly. So just getting her to trust me on the ground and just let her guard down. Like I always try and like sit in my horse's stall, especially when I first get them. I sit in their stall and sometimes usually it takes like just a few weeks for them to just hang out and like cuddle and eat next to me. It took her like 6 months to get
Wow.
over and feel comfortable enough to let her guard down and be like, okay, this is actually home. And to where she actually now is the horse more than any of my horses. When I go and sit down in her stall, like after lunch, she'll sit like lay down with me.
Hmm.
So,
You had to earn it though.
oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, this 2 years later now it's a routine and it took her a long time. And now I feel such a huge responsibility to never break that trust and always make sure that she knows I'm her home. She can trust me. She's safe. She's loved no matter what.
Do you know the longest she ever stayed in a home before you had her?
I know she was with a guy from ages 4 to 8, but I really don't know a lot of her story. So she was in a huge sales barn. And I know during that 4 years, she was sold to a girl. She stayed with the same trainer, and then the girl sold her back. And so I think it's always been a little bit, she's been all over. And she was like world champion at 4, 5, and 6 years old. So she was also asked a lot of at a young
Mm.
age. So she's kind of like a child star too. So I feel like I've inherited a lot of intense traits from a horse she was asked a lot of her whole life. And I think for me, I've never had a bond with a horse like this because I've never had a horse that has come from such a intense background. And then I've had to like she has to trust me for us to perform because I'm also a girl. She's only been able to be ridden by guys. She was sold to a girl once, and I understand why. She was too difficult for the girl, and
What does she do?
she's just extremely powerful. Like to
Wow.
ride, she's like one of the most powerful horses in the world. The best male riders in dressage in the world have ridden her. So it's not like it's not like she's just being ridden by any
Is she
guy.
strong?
She's really, really strong. She's extremely powerful, but that's also why she's one of the most talented horses
Yeah,
in the
why
world.
she's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you got to take the good with the tricky. And also the way I ride and the way my trainer rides, we're really like transforming her to use her power in a way that she's still really fancy, but softer, if that makes
Mm.
sense. So she doesn't have to push at a 10 in order to get a huge score. She has to like be light and soft and she can still get an even better score in my opinion, but it takes a long time. It's still going to take a couple years for me to really show her full potential.
Well, and I feel like, I mean, I am certainly not like at a Grand Prix dressage level, but I feel like when horses are young, it's always like forward into the contact, and then as you go up the levels, it's like, okay, well now
I
do it
got the forward.
differently.
What do I
Yeah,
do?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's definitely a balance. And she, and it's different training methods. And I don't want to talk bad about anybody who had her before, but it's just different. It's a different household she's in now. And I think she really is starting to love it, which makes
Mm.
me so happy. Like my sister-in-law actually saw her a couple years ago and like interacted with her, and then she moved, and then she moved back here actually, and she interacted with Theo again, and she's like, I almost didn't recognize her. This is a different horse. Like she came
Mm.
up to me in the stall. She let me pet her. She's interactive. Like she wants to be around people.
Coming out of her shell a bit.
Yeah, she was so introverted. She'd like turn around and her head would be away from the door all the time. She didn't like people really. She just didn't want to interact. And now she is like the nosiest body. And it's so cute and we love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, low extroversion horses, they tend to process things more internally, and she's also higher on the stability side. So she's just not as expressive when it
Yeah.
comes to emotions.
Yeah.
She'd rather, and with a high independence, she'd rather just kind of retreat and deal with it on
Yeah.
her own.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nice to see that you've like really spent some time with her and helped her learn to process things a little differently, maybe.
It's been so special. And I think I connect with her a lot because like I'm very similar to her. So it was a very
I
intense
don't think
couple
anyone
years.
would think that you're low extroversion, but you
Yeah,
know.
no one would think that, but I truly I've just learned to become extroverted with how public I've become, but I'm very independent and I definitely like am more of a flight person and to like
Mm.
try to fix things internally. And so that also helped me connect with her because I just feel like I understood, like I know where you're coming from. I'm not going to force you out of your shell. I'm just going to like love you out of your shell.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the management side of things because I'm really curious what you do that you feel helps her feel like she can be more open and not so reserved. What do you do around the barn to help her be herself?
Yeah. So for me, and I know this isn't possible if you were managing a stable of like 70 horses, but for me, I have to be the one primarily handling her, especially at the beginning. And then a lot of praise, a lot of releases, a lot of positivity. I think that at first, even if the horse doesn't seem like they're responding to the praise or the positivity, they're just not letting you know it yet. So anytime and I'm very, some people don't may not agree with this. I am extremely high on like using treats for praise. And also when I first got her, I mean, she would almost get loose all the time in hand. So like the only way I could actually manage her was to teach her like anytime you're spooky, I have a cookie. And so she actually now, even when she's nervous, she'll just turn into me. And then she'll just walk with her head like in my chest the whole way home.
Aw.
So I use a lot of treats. I use a lot of praise. I use a lot of positive reinforcement. And you have to be consistent with all of that because I'm sure a lot of people are doing that. But I think the consistency in the reinforcement is key. Like with all of their animal training and even, raising kids, you have to positively reinforce them so that they're not traumatized by anything.
Or
Yeah.
any reinforced, like any
Yeah.
boundaries that you set, if you're inconsistent about those,
Yeah.
especially with a profile like Theo where they're high independence and high structure and they need that clarity.
Yes.
And if they don't get
Exactly.
that clarity or that standard changes or whatever, she's going to be like, what's going on?
A
Like, this is,
100%.
yeah, she's going to get
Yes.
frustrated.
Yeah, and she's so funny because she is always my first horse that I ride. And some days she'll have a day off and then I'll ride Diva or Rapunzel first. She is pissed now if I ever ride anybody else first. She stands out at her stall and she stares at my groom Michael. She's in love with my groom Michael.
Mm.
And she stares at him and does not leave the front of her stall until he comes and gets her. And she's like tosses her head. She just can't believe it. So like that structure is so important, and it's so funny now that she knows her structure, she's comfortable in it, and if she is not that first horse, she cannot believe it.
She's like, excuse me, you got that
Yeah,
wrong. Yeah, you made a
exactly.
mistake. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so cute.
So, from a riding perspective, then, what sort of tips have you figured out works well for her personality?
Yeah, so it's so similar. Like what's funny with her on the ground, she's less secure than she is under saddle.
Mm.
When this horse is tacked up and when you are on her, she is the most confident queen I have ever sat on in my life. I even had this horse Sunday Boy. He was so confident, but he would still like listen enough to me. If she wants to do her own thing, she is doing her own thing. And especially when I started with her and she wasn't confident in me, didn't know who I was at all, she would be like, you know what? I got this. I'm taking over. You stay back there because I don't know who you are and I don't know how you're going to treat me. And I'm going to take over. So just again, showing her that no matter what she did, I would ride her in the same way. And that even if say like she would have like these little panic attacks all the time when I asked from a trot to a canter, like she would bolt off because she thought I would put a ton of pressure on her, and just like bringing her back slow every time. And like no matter how frustrated I got, I couldn't let her know I was frustrated because she had to be able to trust that my corrections were going to be soft and we're going to be the same every time. So I think knowing that whatever she did, I would be consistent. And then she started to lock into what I was doing when she realized that I was responding the same way every time. And then she started, even though she was 12 when I got her, she really started to learn a new way of being ridden, which is tricky with an older horse that's that independent and that confident.
Yeah.
But you have to, again, you have to have boundaries. You have to set guidelines, but the way you set them and the way you maneuver them is the most important thing.
Consistent and fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said when under saddle, she's super confident. And I'm curious, is that the same? Like, do you ever take her on trail rides or anything like that? Is she
Yeah. So
confident on trail rides too?
not as much. She's
Okay.
confident with what she's good at,
Yeah.
which I'm similar. She likes trail, but she likes if someone's leading her. So if Michael is there, like in Europe, there are tons of trails we went on, but when I didn't have Michael versus when I had Michael, extremely different. So when she is in her element, which is in the dressage ring, she is like, step back, I'm a queen. And then
Yeah, that high
anytime
structure. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Anytime you take that structure away, she needs more comfort.
Support. Yeah.
Yep.
Were you there long enough to do it regularly?
Yes.
Trails,
Uh-huh.
did it get better over time?
Yes, it
Okay.
did. Yep, it did. After she understood. But yeah, it took time for sure.
From a competition standpoint, when you go to shows, is there anything that you do in particular to prepare her for those?
Yeah, so I make sure at home, same thing, like her routine is exactly the same. And if you miss one step in that routine, you can tell she's thrown off in the competition. So I've only competed her 4 or 5 times now because we had just a long journey to get to the show ring. It was
Yeah.
really long and hard with her. Our first competition was in February of this year. And I just knew that she would have to be from the second she was fed to the second we gave her her gastrogard, for the second she got her grain, to when I put her saddle on, to when I put her bridle on, to how I put her saddle and bridle on, to when I got on, to how I warmed up, to in the show, to after the show. It had to be exactly like clockwork, like at home. And I noticed if ever I switched up something or if ever I did something in the wrong order, it would throw her off just a little bit and it changed in her in the show ring. So that structure from home to show, making sure you establish it in both areas. It was extremely important for her.
How does your groom, Michael, you said?
Yes.
How does he play a role in that?
He's huge. I mean, so he basically, thankfully, all of my staff, I have Michael, Monica, and Jennifer, and they all are so incredible at following my lead in how I treat my horses. And basically, Michael and I just kind of memorized the structure together. So when we got her, I would handle her primarily, but then Michael slowly started integrating himself in. And then basically we just kind of have it down to where it doesn't matter if it's me or it doesn't matter if it's Michael grooming her. It's the exact same setup just because we've done it for years now. So now it's pretty amazing. If I'm not there, Michael can completely do her routine and she's completely settled with him as well, which is cool to see.
Did it take as long for him as well to build that relationship? You
It
said
took
it
a
was like
long,
6 months. Yeah.
yeah, it took a long time. And especially, I think she's more comfortable around girls than guys. So it took a little longer, but he's so good with horses and he has such good feel. I think in some ways she loves him more than she loves me. Probably because he like feeds her more too, you know?
Yeah.
He's there more often, giving her more cookies. But, yeah, it took her a long time to trust him, and he's just so good at being patient, and he's just like, as long as it takes is what it'll take, and just hours and hours of hand walking and grazing and tacking up and feeding, and it just takes you showing up every day, being consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
From a dressage perspective, how do you feel Fio's personality has influenced her success as a dressage horse?
Yeah, for me, I love a confident horse. I think to do what they do, it's physically taxing, it's mentally, emotionally taxing, and a horse that's confident performs better, in my opinion. They go out there and they want to show off, and she loves to show off. She knows she's good. Like when you sit on her, she knows she's talented. I
Mm-hmm.
ride so many horses and they're insecure or I have to pull it out of them. She knows she's it. She knows she's hot stuff. And to me, I think that adds so much magic into your test. Yeah, her personality is everything. And then you can see, like, if you watch my show videos, you can see where she wants to take over sometimes and get a little headstrong, and where we're still working that out when maybe she wants to take over and be like, I got this, let me take over. And when I have to be like, hey, this is what we're doing our zigzag right now. Like, let's focus. And I think it's only gotten better and better. And at home, it's getting pretty magical, which is special. And just doing it in the show ring now, I have to bring that out. But
Mhm.
I think she's just perfectly made for dressage, in my opinion.
Do you
Yeah.
practice the tests in advance, or is she one that will anticipate?
She's pretty amazing at doing either. So
Okay.
I can do either. I don't practice a ton of the tests just to save her legs more than anything, but she's so good at not anticipating. There is one time she anticipated and it killed me in my Olympic qualifying. There's this one corner you go after your pirouettes, you trot after your canter, and she anticipated that two shows in a row when
Mm,
she trotted when she wasn't supposed to, and it just killed my score. And thankfully, she does so many other amazing things that she's still got good scores. So yeah, that's where she didn't anticipate, and that's where like her independence. She was like, "All right, I know what I'm doing. I'm taking over." And
yeah.
that's where it's like, "No, you got to be a little less independent here, lady, and listen to mom."
Yeah.
But it makes you train better at home. So now I never, ever, ever practice trotting in that spot. And now it's good. Now I shouldn't speak too soon. I've only done 5 shows. So everybody's gonna see next year if she does anticipate. But for the most part, she's pretty awesome. Yeah.
From your experience, do you think biological factors like genetics and the parents and that sort of thing, or life experiences are more influential on personality development?
I know this is such a vague answer, but it depends. So I had a horse who was a jazz, and a lot of jazzes are known to be a little bit cuckoo. A lot are good. Whoever is out there who has a jazz and loves it. I've seen them.
Everyone's listening, like, no.
Exactly. I understand they can be great, but
Yeah.
mine was not. And his was completely genetic, I would say.
You had him young, or?
I didn't have him young, but the problems that he had was like he's scared of like he spooked at everything
Hmm.
all the time, spooked at everything. But I do think that nurture can make nature worse, if that makes sense. So I think if you have a horse that is genetically inclined to do something, the way you nurture it can completely reverse it, can stay in control of it, on top of it, or it can make it a lot worse. And I've had horses that have been through that whole spectrum of it. So I had one horse that was naturally spooky. I think he was ridden quite tough in his lifetime, and it made him more resistant to pressure. So that's where like naturally he was born spooky, and I think nurture with the pressure made him worse. And then I've had a horse that, like, I have Flynn, who's naturally like so chill and like just go with the flow. And then I have had to spice him up a little bit by like making him a little sharper, like, hey, pay attention, let's do this. We got to work for just 30 minutes and then you're
Yeah.
going to work for the next 23 and a half hours. So I think it's both, but I think the way you nurture how they're made is extremely important.
Where do you think Theo falls in that?
Personally, I think if I had her whole life, I could have possibly made a bit of a difference in her. And again, this is not to talk bad about anybody else. This is just how I personally raise my horses.
Mm-hmm.
I take a little bit, I would say, too long with them. So my Grand Prix horses are usually older. My young horses are trained later on in life, which means you can't make as much money sooner off of them. But usually their legs last longer, their brains develop a little bit slower, but better.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases. Some horses are genuinely talented younger, and I totally understand that. But I think with Fio, she's so independent, she's so structured, and she's willing to work for the rider, that maybe being pushed that much that young maybe was a lot for her brain, and then turned her a little bit into maybe too much of a powerhouse, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there are ways she could have been less pushed necessarily, and that would maybe make her a little bit more in tune with her rider to when I have her now, kind of, if any of this is making sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that she wouldn't feel the need to be like, let me take over, I got this, let's go full power. You know, let's work together and let's just do this step by step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and hopefully XPI can help with something like this, right? Because, I mean, you spent 2 years really figuring out how to really work with her and build that relationship. And it's very fortunate that you had that opportunity and the ability to do that. And hopefully with XPI, people can really focus on understanding the horse for who they are and not trying to make them into something that they're not, and being able to build that relationship even faster. I mean, obviously Fio has her personality where she's not really super trusting and she just takes a long time to build that relationship anyways. But with XPI, it just helps people understand their horses a little bit more.
I think that was awesome. I think that test was like unbelievably accurate, and even now that I'm like thinking about it and going into training, I kind of want to like keep it in the back of my head and in my training. So it's really helpful, actually.
If you want to know your horse's profile, you can get a profile at the XPI website, which is www.equineperformanceidentities.com. If you like this podcast, we'd really appreciate if you showed us some love by rating, following, and sharing with others. Thanks for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.